What we're going to be doing is writing quadratics in vertex form. And how we're going to be doing that is we're going to be using completing the square. When we're completing the square, there's four main steps. First step is factor a. And so whatever a value is, the number in front of the x squared, we're going to factor that out. Next, and this is the pivotal step, is finding the new c value. And once we find the new c value, what we're going to do is we're going to take that and we're going to add it on both sides of the equation. Now this one's a little confusing because we see 4 on one side and 8 on the other, but that's because there's a 2 in front of the parenthesis, and we know 2 times 4 is 8. Our third step is factor. And so we're going to look for two numbers that multiply together, give us 4, add up to -4, which is -2, -2. If we're doing it correctly, it's always the same. That's why it's called completing the square, because we come up with a square binomial. And then our last step is to get the y by itself, and we subtract the 8 on both sides to get -7. So for the first one, it's an easy one because if you're looking at it, notice our a value is 1, so we could skip the first step. We're going to go straight to our c value. So we're going to take our b value, divide it by 2, and what we're going to do is we're going to square it. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to put x squared plus 4x plus 4, and then we're going to put the plus 1. Now, because we added the 4 on one side, we're going to add the 4 on the other. Then what we're going to do is we're going to factor it. Two numbers that multiply together give us 4. Add up to 4, it's going to be 2 and 2. Once again, if we're doing this properly, it's always going to be the same number. So x plus 2 squared. And then our last step is always to get the y by itself. So we're going to subtract the 4. And that right there gives us y is equal to, we have the x plus 2 squared and then minus 3. Now, what I always like to do is find the vertex, because the next lesson we're going to be graphing these and we need to know what the vertex is. And if you remember, we've talked about this before, it's always the opposite, so -2 and the number -3. Now for the next one, what we're going to do is we're first going to factor out our a value. And so when we're looking at this, our a value is always in front of the x squared. Now, when we're factoring it, we only factor the first two terms. So we have y equals 3, and then we have x squared minus 2x, and then minus 8. Our c value is going to be our b value, and in this case, our b value is -2 because we factored the 3, divided by 2, and we square it. -2 divided by 2 is -1, squared is 1. So what we have is we have 3x squared minus 2x plus 1. And then what we do is we're going to add 1 on the other side, but notice that the 1 actually has a 3 in front of it. So technically, what we're going to do is multiply it by 3. Then what we're going to do is we're going to factor it. Two numbers that multiply together give us 1, add up to -2. Would, of course, be -1 and -1. And that gives us x minus 1 squared. And then our last step is to get the y by itself. So we subtract the 3. And we get y is equal to 3. And then x minus 1 squared minus 11. Once again, I like to make sure that we know where the vertex is, because that's really important. It's always the opposite. So 1 and -11. Now, letter C. This is an easy one. And why I believe it's easy is because we get to skip the first half, or I should say first fourth. Our first step, the a value is 1, so we don't have to do it. So we're going straight to our c value, -12 divided by 2. We're going to square it. -12 divided by 2 is -6. Squared is 36. So we have y equals x squared minus 12x plus 36, and then we have -7. I'm going to add the 36 on the other side because I added it on this side. Notice there's no parentheses. That's why it's a straight 36 instead of another number. Our second step is factoring. Two numbers that multiply together give us 36, add up to negative 12. And that, of course, is negative 6. So what we have is we have x minus 6 squared and then minus 7. And then I'm going to subtract the 36. And that gives us y is equal to, and then we have x minus 6 squared, and then we have minus 43. Once again, I like to make sure we know what the vertex is, always the opposite, 6, and then negative 43. And that's going to be really important for our next lesson when we actually graph these. So for letter D, once again, we have an a value, so we're going to factor. Notice that we're not factoring the c, we're only factoring the first two. So I'm going to factor the 2 out, and I get an x squared plus 4x. And then I'm going to find my new c value. So I'm going to take the 4 divided by 2, and I'm going to square it. And that right there gives me 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 squared is 4. So what I have is y equals 2x squared plus 4x plus 4. And the most common mistake is adding 4 on the other side, but we know that we're not going to be adding 4 because technically the 4 has a 2 outside the parentheses, so we're putting an 8. We're going to factor it. Two numbers that multiply together give us 4. Add up to 4 would be 2 and 2. So what we have is we have x plus 2 squared and then minus the 15. And so what we do is we subtract the 8 as our last step. And what we get is y equals 2x plus 2 squared minus 23. Once again, what I want to do is figure out our vertex because that's important for graphing. So negative 2 and negative 23.